So let's continue on this series of videos that I'm doing on what do the belts in Jiu Jitsu mean. This one is going to answer the question, what is a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Let's see if I can get through this in one take. Last night was 4th of July and the watermelon margaritas were dangerously delicious and I'm hurting today, but we're going to do it. So let's talk about it. As always, don't forget that I've got some instructional courses at rickellis.com. Check the description for a coupon code. I always have a coupon so you can get my stuff at a discount. And if you purchased one of our new rash guards that I just announced about a week or so ago, I want to thank you. That item has become a runaway bestseller. We've sold more rash guards than any other product, which is fantastic because my goal is going to be to make the Art of Skill gear store have the best rash guards anywhere. And it's going to take some time to develop that. These are all my original designs and it takes a while to build out a design for a new product. But that's the goal. This shirt that I'm wearing has become our #2 best-selling item, which surprised me. This was just a piece of art that I made and it was a concept for a shirt that I came up with, and I was surprised that it has resonated. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, you can go to rickellis.com or directly to the swag store at artofskillgear.com. And I appreciate all your support. Okay, so what is a brown belt? And as always, I'm talking in these videos to the belt below. I'm really talking to the purple belt. What should you be working on as a purple belt leading up to the brown belt, especially if you're closing in? Jiu Jitsu is a mystery. How do you get better at Jiu Jitsu? What should I be working on in Jiu Jitsu? Because nobody really tells you those things. You're expected to just keep showing up and showing up and showing up. And that's really the process. It's the epiphanies that you make on the mat when confronted by an obstacle that you can't get around, right? You're having trouble setting up that arm bar. You're having trouble getting out of side control. You're experiencing something on the mat and that forces you to do some research, to do some experimentation, to begin doing some A/B testing, and to solve that particular problem. And in Jiu Jitsu, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of similar problems that we have to deal with. So hopefully I can help focus your training. I have some specific ideas on what a brown belt is and what you should be focused on as a mid-high level purple belt to really put yourself in a great position to get your brown belt and then go from brown belt to black belt. Brown belt to me is two things. It is the belt of pressure and it is the belt of completion. And let me explain what I mean by that. We'll start with the second because that might sound strange to you. What do I mean by it's the belt of completion? Nobody in Jiu Jitsu is perfectly balanced, meaning you're equally effective from the top or from the bottom, meaning your sweeps game is just as good as your chokes game, meaning your takedown game is just as good as your armbar game. Nobody's perfectly balanced. But the brown belt is the belt at which you should become pretty complete. In fact, that's really the definition of a black belt. When you earn your black belt, you should be a complete martial artist. You should have a complete and effective Jiu Jitsu game. There's still more to learn. There's always more to learn. This is a never-ending journey, and a lot of people say the black belt is the belt at which you really start to learn, and that's an interesting way that people put that. But in some ways that's true because there's a depth there that you're able to see and perceive that you don't get to see during the earlier part of the journey. But brown belt is really where you make a huge push toward rounding yourself out. You can't have any glaring holes in your game as a brown belt. I should be able to drop you into any position, offensively or defensively, and you should have an answer for the problem that you're being presented with. I should be able to ask you to transition from any position to any other position. You should have transitional sequences. You should have a little bit of everything as a brown belt. And that should be your focus as a high-level purple belt, mid to high-level purple belt. There's a tendency in Jiu Jitsu to always strengthen our strengths and minimize our weaknesses. And that's important to do because you want to be effective. Ultimately, jiu-jitsu is a live martial art in which you're judged on your effectiveness of getting out from disadvantaged positions, your effectiveness to get to the top and be dominant, and your effectiveness in getting the submission. But you can do all those things. You can become very effective with a very narrow game. You can play your A game, and your A game is a subset of the totality of what you know, and you can be very effective at those things. But with a lot of practitioners, especially earlier in their journey, there's a big drop off in effectiveness when they play their A game versus their B game or their C game. And so the brown belt is where you're trying to shore all that up because you don't want there to be any glaring problems with your game. Now, one of the ways that the brown belt can complete themselves is by teaching. Usually when you earn your brown belt, especially at a bigger academy, that's the belt where you begin teaching, and the head instructor will sometimes rely on you to help them teach classes, or maybe they'll offer you a slot. Maybe you teach the fundamentals class, or maybe you're asked to teach the kids class. I would highly recommend jumping at those opportunities. You can become incredibly effective at jiu-jitsu and never teach. But that becomes a very internally focused mindset, right? The high-level competitor that never teaches, all they're focused on is themselves. You know, how do I get better? How do I get better? How do I get better? How do I get more effective? And because we're all built differently, we all have different attributes, we all ultimately develop a game that's unique to each of us. You can become very effective by focusing internally, but when you have to teach others, it's no longer about you. It's no longer about you, it's about them and what they need. And so being able to bring other people up, being able to identify what other practitioners need and be able to give them those things, that's a huge skill. I opened my school as a brown belt, and I remember my instructor, Roy Dean, said, yeah, that's good that you're doing that because that's finishing school. He called it finishing school or graduate school. It's where you really put the polishing touches on completing your game and achieving a depth of understanding of all the techniques of jiu-jitsu so that you can transmit that knowledge to other people. I'm pretty lucky in that I started teaching early. I started teaching even as a blue belt because I was part of a brand new academy at the time, and there weren't a lot of high-level guys in that school, and so the instructor relied on some of us to take up the slack here and there. And so I got opportunities to teach at blue belt. I got an extended opportunity to teach as a purple belt. I was training under a guy named Trent Lewis, who's fantastic, but he needed back surgery, and so he was going to be out for a few months, and he asked me to cover all his classes. And then later I opened my own school. And an interesting thing happens if you've never taught before and you go teach a class, your impulse is always going to be to teach the things that you're working on in your own game, right? You're teaching the stuff that you like. It's all about you and the things that you like to do. That's what you're presenting the class. But eventually you realize that this is not what the people in the room need. They don't necessarily need to learn the stuff that you're working on. You're on a completely different journey than them. And so teaching is going to help you do that. And it's also going to help you learn the key details in any given technique that are going to allow a new person to assimilate that technique faster. I can always tell an inexperienced teacher from an experienced one, even if they're black belt level, by how much information they download onto the students. The inexperienced teacher will just download and download and download, meaning that you're teaching an armbar and you will teach every single nuance of that armbar. But here's the thing, not everybody in the room is ready for that level of detail. And in fact, that level of detail is counterproductive when there's no context for that detail. It just becomes noise and information overload. The savvy teacher knows the 2 or 3 key details to focus on any given technique. And I remember experiencing this. I would teach, let's say, an armbar from guard. And then, all right, let's do it with your training partners. 1, 2, 3, boom, everybody splits up. and you're watching the clusters do the armbar, and you realize, oh, I should have emphasized a particular detail because those white belts aren't really getting this very well. There's a detail that I should have mentioned. And so when you teach regularly, you start to develop a real deeper understanding of the critical details that make techniques work. And this is what's going to complete you as a martial artist. And again, if you have no interest in teaching, I'm not saying you can't become incredible, but it is an accelerator. I believe it's an accelerator, and it's going to allow you to reach a depth of understanding that you're not otherwise going to have. A lot of times we do things intuitively in jiu-jitsu. We just do things the way we do them without even thinking about it. But when you have to explain why you do something, sometimes you have to even figure that out. You're asked, why do you do it that way? I don't know why you do it that way. Let me think about that. Oh, I do it that way because of this. So I would recommend teaching as a brown belt. So that is the completion part that should be a big focus. The second aspect of the brown belt is pressure. I've said this before, we generally think of pressure as something that you do from the top, and we've all felt it. A more skilled practitioner puts you on your back, they've got you in side control, they're putting immense pressure on yourself, you can barely breathe, you feel stifling, you can't get out, you're stuck, you feel a lot of pressure. And yeah, that is pressure, but that's just one implementation of pressure. Pressure is something that can be implemented from anywhere, top or bottom. Defensively, you can apply pressure, right? You're being attacked, the person is you're sparring with has an offensive advantage and you're defending. Well, the good brown belt should be able to defend in a way that puts the person on top under pressure. And how do you apply pressure? A lot of it has to do with connection and taking up space. So being connected in places that make a lot of sense to be connected. You can grab someone just about anywhere on their gi, and you will have some control over the person grabbing there, but that's not the best connection point. There are connection points that are much, much more effective. And so as a brown belt, as a purple leading up to brown belt, you want to learn to make those connection points in the places that give you maximum leverage so that you can claim that limb. If I do a 2-on-1 on someone's arm, let's say, I want to claim it. I want to control it in a way that gives me the leverage advantage over that limb. And then it's about taking up the space around the limb. I can do that by elevating my hips, by moving my knees into position, by using my entire body to take up all of that available space. Taking up space is how you prevent people from escaping. If I can put you in side control, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to escape, but I'm really just focused on not leaving any gaps. Not leaving any gaps at your hips, not leaving any gaps at your shoulder line, and taking up all that space. So learning to apply pressure, this is something that will intuitively happen. Purple belts know how to apply pressure. It isn't, you're not doing it at a real high level yet, but as a purple, you should have a reasonable pressure game. As a blue belt, you should even be able to apply some pressure as well. Compared to a white belt, a blue belt should have pressure. But the brown belt is really the belt at which you learn to apply pressure from everywhere. That's really the defining characteristic of a brown, the pressure game. When you roll with a good brown belt, you should always feel uncomfortable, right? You should always feel uncomfortable. Even if you're a black belt going against a good brown belt, they're making you feel uncomfortable. Now you can give them, you can give it to them in return as well. You're making them feel uncomfortable, but there shouldn't be any glaring gaps that allow you to exploit, defensively or offensively. So those are my thoughts on the brown belt. I think I have less to say about the brown belt because there is less to do as a brown belt. You have a game. by the time you're deep into purple belt, you have a game. Your game is quantified, it's defined, it's a game that's natural, that's comfortable to you, you have a certain effectiveness. You're not really needing to add a lot more to go from purple to brown. It's not like you're having to add an entirely new position or, sequences or anything like that. You have your game at purple belt, but what you're looking to do is become deadly effective with your game, and that's about the details that give you a completeness in your understanding, the details of gripping, the details of positioning, the details of where do I put my hips in relation to their hips. And those are the details that let you connect, create the connections, take up space, and apply pressure. So I hope that helps you. And yeah, that's it. Okay, talk to you next time.